So hello, my name is Eric Liguori. I'm the Royer Chair of Entrepreneurship at Rowan University in Glassboro, New Jersey, and I guess I'm responsible for pushing this conversation moving forward a little bit. I had reached out to my colleague Cheryl in engineering, and Doan and I, Doan's at John Carroll University, have been looking on the entrepreneurship side of things, saying, well, how are people flipping their classrooms when a lot of what we do is very hands-on in nature, and what's kind of going on with that? And then I start talking to Cheryl, and it's like, well, both in how we're teaching entrepreneurship within engineering at Rowan and just in the general nature of how we teach engineering as a whole, it's kind of the same scenario. And I think that's probably true for a lot of fields. And so I thought, well, let's have a dialogue. And the Keen group was gracious enough to help us convene this. And so Doan and Cheryl, thanks for humoring me. And I'm excited to see so many people on here. I think it's as much a dialogue amongst all of us as it is, any sort of a panel. But I'll float the first question. I think that we can dwell on the positive or we can dwell on the negative of this scenario. And for me, I kind of view this as an opportunity. And I know, Doan, you had some thoughts around the opportunity that's in front of us for education. Do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, for me, I obviously see a lot of uncertainty going on, and a lot of kind of chaos and disruption going on. And I always tend to look at those situations with the lens of opportunity to say, look, what can be done here? And so I think a lot of times in education in general and in a lot of fields in education, people get stuck. We get stuck in our routines. We get stuck in, this is the way we do it. This is how we teach it. This is the exercises we use or anything like that. And so I think this is really an opportunity to go back and kind of rethink or reimagine a lot of that. And hopefully people don't just, after all the dust settles here and we go back to teaching the way, is comfortable for us. Hopefully we just don't go back to teaching the same way we used to. Now, maybe we can integrate a little more technology that we're a little more familiar with, or maybe we can figure out ways to bring other voices into the classroom, or just come up with different ways to engage students and create sort of better learning experiences. So that's just how I look at things, right? Naturally is to try to find the opportunity. And so I see a really big one here to kind of disrupt education in general. So I just hope some people take advantage of that and start to think about that.
Cheryl, what's your take on it from an engineering perspective? Is there an opportunity here, or is this more crisis?
So I definitely see the opportunity in what lies ahead. The idea of pivoting our classes and trying to take what we're used to have as like extremely hands-on and students working on projects, how can we pivot a lot of those projects to create elements to move pieces that are online and to have students collaborate in different ways? I think oftentimes our students are much more familiar with the technology than we are. I've seen over the years that I've been teaching in engineering, students going from just working in like office type software to they're all on Google Docs. They're all collaborating in different ways. They're jumping in at different times. They're using apps in order to coordinate their team meetings and communicate with one another. So I think this is a prime opportunity for faculty to get more familiar with the resources that the students tend to go to as it is, and how can we use that and leverage that as a new way to connect with our students, I think is an exciting time and challenge. So we're meeting them in a different standpoint. Yes, it's going to be uncomfortable, and yes, it's going to be a challenge as we transition. But I think if we can take some of these elements and then, like Doan was saying, build them into our classes moving forward, we might find that we're actually meeting our students where they are more than we necessarily were in the past. We'll have a better understanding for their experiences and the lens they're bringing to the classroom.
Absolutely. So, one thing that stood out to me as I look at the data that came in from the survey we sent out, and I thank you to all of you who completed that. It's been really interesting. We're excited to begin to share some preliminary results and certainly much more detail over the next week or two. But one of the things that stood out to me most when I looked at the differences between the entrepreneurship, more business school faculty responses and the engineering faculty responses was everybody's sort of dealing with this uncertainty, and it certainly is abrupt for everyone sort of universally. But it was only like, I don't know, 40 to 45% of the business school faculty had taught online before, and that makes sense to me. But it was only like 12 or 13% of the engineering faculty that have responded that indicated the same. And so for first-time teachers teaching online, what resources or best practices would you offer up or suggest?
So I can say, at least from Rowan's perspective right now, a lot of our faculty members are teaching first-year engineering design, which I know some of you guys have taught those types of classes in engineering colleges across the U.S. We do it very hands-on and team-based at Rowan, so our classes are typically 24 students, so we're on the smaller scale in terms of class size, but we have those students actively working and prototyping in our classroom environments. And I think one of the most creative ways that I saw is in our sophomore design class, we actually have a group of faculty members. They were doing a project that was called Drones for Good. So they actually had the students building out drones that were supposed to then go into communities and provide services that individuals needed. The students were actively prototyping and building the drones into the classroom up until we went on spring break. And so now what they've done is they've figured out how to create a lot of the pieces that were associated with the drones in the Onshape CAD software platform. And they're having the students actually take these different pieces and then assemble them to create their own drones. So piloting with the different shapes, but all in an online platform method. And then they're going to use that as a means for like, what type of creative drone designs can they actually manufacture, which I thought was kind of a unique spin on the hands-on design piece, because a lot of the times we think, well, if we can't get the students the materials, then they can't do design anymore. So that's like a unique way that I think some of our faculty here at Rowan are thinking about the hands-on piece in light of this transition to online.
I like that.
Doan, I think one of the biggest parallels that is taught in entrepreneurship and certainly in engineering is the notion of building empathy for your customer, using sort of a design-based approach to moving projects forward. Once you get through that sort of piece, you get to this customer discovery nexus. How do you do online customer discovery?
Yeah, there's a ton of tools, right? It can be super simple or super complicated, but you're still, for the most part in today's world, students are still having to find potential customers online. They find them through, groups, Reddit groups, Facebook groups, whatever, LinkedIn groups. They're finding them through customer reviews they're posting, that kind of thing, through social media. And so there are tools, whether it be, it could be as easy as FaceTime, Skype, Zoom, Blue Jeans, whatever, where they can have conversations, and it's not face-to-face, but they can still see customers' faces, right, to read body language and understand what customers are kind of feeling around problem interviews or solution interviews or whatever. And it can get as complicated as sharing screens and doing screen testing and all kinds of stuff. But, for my students, I tell them, like, just FaceTime people, just Zoom people, just get them on Skype or whatever and talk to them. It's not, and once they understand that they can use the technology they're comfortable with to achieve the same purpose, and shift over to that, I think they really dive in, because it's even more comfortable for them to do that kind of stuff using the technology than like sitting, across the table from somebody. So I've actually found my students do a much better job because they're forced to use the technology they like to use anyway.
So to build off of Doan's comment, another way that our students, when we do customer discovery and engineering, have approached things is using social media platforms to get questions out to potential customers. So I know Facebook is not necessarily as popular with the current generation of students that's coming through our classes today. Some of them have used Facebook. Others have been using like Twitter or Instagram. They use Google Forms a lot, and then they push that stuff out. But that's another way that you could at least collect survey feedback. It's not the same as like the one-on-one interviews that Doan was talking about, but it's a good starting point for gathering information on potential customers. We use that with, we have a first year project where we have the students doing universal design of a toy that's supposed to help children that are in hospitals and stuff like that. So it's for like the Little Wheels project that's associated with the Ronald McDonald House. And so because most of our students don't necessarily have access to kids directly, they actually will email this out to colleagues that they have within their network that actually are babysitters, or they'll email it out to parents that are working as teachers at schools, and then that's the way they kind of are connecting with their customer base. So they're trying to be a little bit creative in terms of their ways of reaching out and talking to individuals in this time.
Yeah, it does. It takes a little bit of creativity. But, to me, and certainly in the entrepreneurship world, right, that's just another learning point, to say, you still need to accomplish the same goal, but how do we pivot and be able to accomplish that? And, you nudge them a little bit, but I mean, I think if you give them that opportunity, I found anyway that they really kind of dive in and try to figure out, and use the resources that they're comfortable with to accomplish that. So it's kind of cool to watch.
I've been really kind of closely watching what different universities are doing right now in terms of how are they handling the faculty side of this from the standpoint of like tenure and promotion and peer observation and student observations. What's your take on it? Do you think that people are going to experience above average, below average, or no difference on the student evaluation outcome?
I think it depends really depends on a lot of factors, right? But I think and I hope that most schools will sort of put an asterisk on this semester when it comes to that type of thing, right? To say, somebody may end up with glowing evaluations and be awesome. Well, that's great. That should be, they should have kudos for that, right? Somebody may take a big hit and things just didn't go well. Well, maybe the things didn't go well because they were willing to try something different and it just didn't work out, or, for any number of reasons. And I think, and I hope that, administrators would understand that this semester was a little bit goofy and not hold that against anybody. I think it's another opportunity for leadership and administration to encourage faculty to try something and step out of their comfort zone and take that risk, right? I'm not privy to all that conversation in my school anyway, but I hope that's what happens in every field, is give them a chance to experiment and try things out, understanding it may not turn out 100% right, and the students may ding people for it, but that shouldn't be something that they're consequenced for.
So in my mind, and I think I've seen universities starting to go that direction, right? Obviously, there's an asterisk, no matter what. Rowan has gone so far as to say that they're not going to use these evaluations in any sort of detrimental way to any of our faculty for tenure or recontracting or otherwise, which is great. But I think if we go back to this notion of opportunity, we have the biggest sandbox we've ever had to be bold, to try new things, to experiment, to use new tools. And if it blows up in our faces and it just doesn't work in terms of the desired outcome we were hoping for, right? The platform fails, the this, the that, the students hate it, the hypothesis you put forward just didn't hold. It doesn't blow back and negatively impact you. And so I hope that people are using this scenario as an opportunity to be a bit bold and to try these tools and to engage in new ways and to experiment, because we can experiment without repercussion in the ways that typically faculty worry about repercussion. Obviously, we want to be responsible. We want to, try things that we think are going to lead to optimal learning outcomes for students. But I hope that people are. It seems to me that there have been sort of 3 customer personas of how people are responding to this, or how faculty are responding to this. One is, I'm going to do voice over PowerPoint. I'm going to plop it up online. I'm going to do multiple choice tests, and my semester is turnkey for the rest of the year. No problems, no issues. Persona number 2 is, I'm going to try and find a way using a conservative set of tools to mimic what I've been trying to do in the classroom, and I'm going to satisfice to the extent I need to pragmatically get my semester done. And then person number 3 is, I'm going all in. I'm looking at tools. I am trying and flipping everything around. I'm experimenting. I'm seeing what works with students. I'm getting their feedback. And I worry a lot about persona number 1. And I worry very little about persona number 3. right? I like the idea from a 10-year perspective. If I'm looking at this as a reviewer, I'm saying this person tried 6 different things. It blew up in their face, but they were bold. They were trying to innovate. They were seeing what worked in their market. They were looking for solutions for their students. And if I look at it and say this person defaulted to voice over PowerPoint, multiple choice online tests and kind of checked out, I don't like seeing that, right? So anecdotally, when you craft that narrative, um, I hope that everybody is choosing to go this sort of bold path with what they're doing. Uh, when I look at the responses that have come in, it seems like a lot of people are using this as an opportunity to go out and try some new tools. I thought it was really refreshing. I went in cynically saying everybody's going to be person number one because I had talked to 2 or 3 people and that got me frustrated. And that's how we ended up going down this path and leading to this conversation. But what I'm seeing in the data is I think a lot of people are experimenting with tools and they're trying new things, and it's really exciting. And so I had said this last week, and it maybe blew back because it was out of context a little bit, but I hope that one of the end results we get is a more digitally literate population of our faculty. And I'm excited to see where we are 3 years from now as a result of everybody getting to experiment a little bit, everybody using tools. Keeping in mind that somewhere between 50 and 80% of us have never gone online before. So we are in very uncharted territory. All of that said, what are the risks? Like, what's the downside here?
You want to take that, Cheryl?
Nice volley my way, Doan. I appreciate that. I think with every situation, there's probably the fear of how it's going to be perceived on the other end. I think that people in general can struggle with uncertainty. And so when you've gotten used to teaching in a physical face-to-face environment where you have your students and you can read their faces and you have a sense of, am I going too fast? Am I going too slow? Do I need to go back and reiterate on this point? Are the students actually engaged and paying attention to the material, or instead are they kind of drifting and not necessarily paying attention to what I want them to pay attention to? So moving to an online environment kind of brings up a lot of those concerns where they might not necessarily be otherwise in a physical face-to-face. But I think all of those risks can be overcome. I like what Eric was pointing out about the fact that most institutions seem to be taking a more lenient approach in terms of at least not penalizing faculty members during this transitionary time. And I think that's important because it gives faculty the freedom to fail in an environment like an academic culture where we don't necessarily always feel we have that right, because there's a lot of pressure and constraints around, especially when you're on the 10-year clock or you're in a recontracting position where your teaching evaluations are hinged so tightly on your performance in the classroom. So I think that's definitely one of the risks. Another risk I would say is just the ability to understand where your students are. So this is a conversation I've had with a lot of my faculty members in my department over the past week. Is it's not business as normal. It's not, oh, I wanted to cover all of this content in the rest of my first year design class. I'm just going to throw it all up online and the students are going to be able to handle all of it. It's like, how can I pare back the content to the really important key concepts that I need them to be able to get? Because face it, I mean, there was a study that came out on the ASEE news brief this morning that was saying that there's 60% is the rate of students that are coming with anxiety and depression related issues in light of COVID-19. So our students are going through a lot of mental health related issues that we as faculty members need to be sensitive about. We need to be aware of where they are, what they're facing, what they're juggling. Some of them have had to go back to homes that are not necessarily safe. They're in environments where they have to work a lot more based on colleagues that I've talked to. Otherwise, they won't be able to keep their jobs because they face the risk of being laid off and they need that source of income. So there's so many different priorities that our students are facing right now. So I think one of the the big risk is just assuming that the students will be able to perform at the same level that they could when they were in our classroom. So just kind of being apprised of that situation. Now I volley it back to you, Doan.
Hey, thanks, Cheryl.
Let me piggyback on that. I'm going to just jump in and intercept that virtual volleyball there. We talk about the freedom to fail, and what a great phrase that was on the faculty side. I think, as much as we're saying, in our classrooms, we can try these new tools, we can try these new things, we're going to be okay if some of them don't work. I think that empathy piece for students, you're right. They're in the same uncharted territory. They have their own, set of context that they're living and operating within. And we need to be willing to give them that same freedom to fail, to recognize that in a normal semester, under normal conditions, if they weren't able to effectively communicate as a group and their project suffered, that would be something we hold them extremely accountable for. Maybe in this scenario, when they say, oh, the tech didn't work, we are more empathetic and we understand a little bit more about what's going on there.
Yeah, and I think one other thing I wanted to kind of piggyback off what Cheryl was saying from the student perspective, I think there's tremendous risk that they're taking and they don't have control over it. It's really up to us. And so I don't understand the engineering world too much. I do a little bit. My father taught at Rose-Hulman, taught math at Rose-Hulman for, 25 years. So I was actually asking him about stuff before this call. And he was explaining to me that a lot of times in engineering curriculum, the progression through courses and the skill building and all is really, really, really critical that, they get this in this class in order to be able to do this in that next class. And so I think part of what can help with that risk to the students also is coordinating with peers, right? Coordinating with the person that, the kids are going to move on to for the next class. And making sure, to your point, Cheryl, about paring down and getting the key core things, making sure that you really are fitting in just the core things at minimum and maybe even at maximum that allow them to continue and succeed in that next class. So, it's a little bit of that forward thinking, but with them in mind in terms of how can we best set them up for success for whatever happens in the fall.
I was thinking of making a comment, but I didn't want to jump in unless it was okay.
Go for it. I was just talking on you. So.
Yeah. So I'm with Santa Clara University out here in California. Obviously, it's a kind of up and coming or starting to be a pretty big hot spot with COVID. So there's a lot of anxiety, and we have a lot of students that come from all over the country, even all over the world. So we've got time zone challenges. The one thing I wanted to share is that we got some really great IT and media support services, and they broke things down for us. What I thought would be really helpful for people is to think of it in terms of 3 things that you want to do, and kind of emphasizing what Eric was saying about the class, the different types of people, what they're going to do. So I was initially in bucket number 1, just naively, just thinking, oh, well, I know how to use Zoom, blah, blah, blah. I'm totally comfortable with tech, but our quarter's starting next week. So it's like, I can't flip everything in a week. And I thought this would be the most engaging way. I've used Blue Jeans, we can do a classroom like this. What I was kind of quickly realized is that it's better if I could switch as much as I can to the behavior of number 3 as much as I can. Now, with that in mind, making it simple, I thought for everybody to think about is we have lots of data because we have lots of online classes, and it's shown, first of all, that switching to the number 3 model that Eric said in terms of kind of somewhat of a flipped classroom, having things what's called asynchronous instead of synchronous. The data is out there, and I was not aware, but the data is out there from students that this is very highly rated when done well. And when done well, it means that number 1, you need to make sure that you are connecting with students. And we got a lot of tools to be able to do that. I won't go into it here, but think about the ways that you can send an email ahead of time out to your students before your class starts. Put a welcome video on of yourself via Zoom. just put lots of messaging out there, whatever your, learning platform is. So connect with students is number one, because absolutely they are stressed out. We just had announced to us as faculty today that one of our engineering students is in LA. Her dad was diagnosed with COVID. She's very stressed. She left her home. So there's going to be more and more like this because the pandemic is not going down. It is like increasing and doubling in terms of deaths every 2 days. So it's going to hit every community. Detroit is on track to be worse than New York City. So that's just to think about. Our students are going to be freaking out. So we need to try to connect with them. So connect with students is one. Number two is provide engaging content. And so what that means is whatever you can in terms of videos or your material for them to read that they could click on, but make it engaging. So just the content itself. Readings offline before a lecture if you're doing it. And then the last one is encourage community amongst the students, so groups. So kind of just three things. Connect as much as you can personally with your students, provide engaging content, and encourage community. So I think if you can kind of focus on those three things that we've seen from our online courses, that makes a big difference.
Thank you so much for sharing, Berna. At this point, it might be a good idea. Does anyone else have key pointers that they've learned so far from their transition that they'd like to share with the group? You could jump in. And we wanted this to be, as Eric kind of introduced at the start, kind of a panel led, but also a discussion where we can all learn from one another. Because I think that's the most powerful thing about Keen, among other networks that are out there right now, is the way we can support each other as faculty members and kind of come together in order to improve the experience of all our students.
I'll jump in with the just a ditto on the need for the asynchronous piece. And I don't have any experience on this. Just reflecting on my past week, having been instructed to basically stay home. All of our students got sent home. All the faculty got sent home. And so when we were told that we were going to go to online, I had this vision of being in my office and in my settings and on campus to do the work that I'm doing. And now I'm doing it at home, and behind me, homeschool is going on with my kids being home because their schools are closed. And so then I'm thinking, oh gosh, this is going to be hard for me to do this work, but I think I can do it. And then I started to have a little bit of empathy for my students, as I have no idea what they're going through. Are some of them taking care of a sibling or a parent? Are they taking on other responsibilities that they don't usually have when they're on campus? Is their time on a machine like this going to be limited? So if I say, like, you have to do this thing at this time or join this meeting at this time, which I would like to do, are they actually going to be free and available to participate? And how is that going to add to their stress level? So I'm just trying to think through everything that I'm doing to try to make it as asynchronous as possible, to be flexible to meet their needs. And I'm going to try to engage with them to see what those needs are. But as my starting point is to be as asynchronous as possible.
It was interesting. I looked at the data that came back on the survey, and it seems like everybody was trending towards synchronous or some sort of a hybrid, and very few people were going completely asynchronous in their plans. But when I look at the data we collected a week ago, that was a little bit different. And I think as this has continued to escalate and evolve, whereas when we maybe first thought, okay, we're just going into like extended spring break or a week or two of this, maybe we'll do it one way. And now we're looking at it saying, are we going to even, get through the summer face-to-face in any way, shape, or form? And is this going to even carry into the fall in some meaningful way? And I think people are starting to look at, how do I hybridize this so that I maintain that touch point, that connection with my students that Verna was saying was so critical, and I completely agree, but also find a way to make it digestible and impactful in a way that my students can access the content on their own schedule and in their own way and time, because everybody does have this level of craziness. Our schedules, our work from home capabilities, our remote in options are all so different from person to person, and they're different on the student side from an empathy standpoint. Their ability to have a private space at home to do it, their ability to have the same schedule. Their work schedule might have changed. They might be out of work. They might be caring for someone that they weren't caring for before. And so I think a lot of those factors do come in. Verna, I will say in your scenario, I do not envy your situation at all from the standpoint of starting with a new group of students right now, because the one thing that I'm maybe most thankful for is that I've already had the opportunity to meet my students and to build that rapport and that level of engagement and dynamic with them. So I feel like I get off a lot easier because I just have to finish out a semester. You have that extra challenge of starting. And I guess maybe we'll all have that challenge come summer if it plays out that way. But I think that's a really, that's a much bigger lift. And I'm glad I'm not having to dive into that one. I wish you a lot of luck because I think that that's especially hard. I'm going to share, I just shared a link in the chat and I can send it to you. Sylvia, 1 second. If I could, I just shared a link in the chat. So Mike, you mentioned, kids at home and this and that. Eric Noyes is an entrepreneurship professor at Babson College. He's got a great exercise for using children for customer discovery and feedback. And so if you've got kids at home, you could almost engage them as a resource to your students through a pitch format where the students, the elementary school kids could give feedback on the ideas. And it does let you test a lot of different things, from the simplicity of the message to the radical candor that children are likely to give versus how we might frame it as adults. So I posted the link there. And if anyone needs the article, I'm glad to send it to him. But he does a fantastic job of debriefing it and talking through. And I think there's some video content linkable through the website. If not, email me or email him, and we can certainly get it to you. It might be fun. I don't know. I might experiment with it myself. Sylvia, were you?
Oh, hi, I'm Sylvia Mayer, and I teach global business, emerging market, how to develop other countries and things like that. Okay. And I teach this because I did this work for a long time. I worked for Cisco Systems, and of course we use WebEx and all of that. So I needed to work with my team globally through the internet. I mean, there was no other way. But the key thing here is how you are going to be presenting the information, things like that. But it needs to be a combination of things. And at the beginning, maybe the first 3 months, we cannot make it happen because everybody needs to be at home. But sometimes you can do a lot of things through the computer, but then you need the one-on-one. The one-on-one is key to building trust, understand who they are, to see how to help them and things like that. So I always have done with my international team. I have people in Asia and Europe and in Latin America, once in a while to bring them in and do that. So I hope in the future, if we need to go more on this, everything in front of the computer, we need another tools maybe where we can have the video plus the whiteboard and how to send information. There are other programs that are a little bit more complete than Zoom, I believe, and the university probably needs to look into that and then do a combination of eventually. So that's my experience. I have been doing international business for over 30 years, so I cannot go to Europe all the time or Asia all the time. So it needs to be a combination. So what I'm trying to say, yes, it can happen. And we are not going to be in this situation all the time either. That's my point of view. Yeah? Does any question, any idea, any comment, any? I'm interested in know.
Yeah, well, I have a question, and maybe this is something that you can help. We are talking about having a big sandbox for faculty that gives it the opportunity to try things and maybe make mistakes.
I cannot understand what you're saying. Sorry. It's not clear.
Yeah, let me try the chat. I write my question through the chat.
Okay, all right, we'll read it out.
Any other question or suggestions or?
I guess maybe I'll just say I have a colleague of mine who teaches at the community college level. She had to like immediately switch over. She's not a really tech comfortable person, but she was able to use the whiteboarding feature. She teaches like physics, so it's a lot of equations, so I would say whoever has tips on anything that makes things easier for equation writing and for students to do that. And then also, in terms of hands-on and design, I like some of the suggestions, but one of the things that she mentioned, and I agree very strongly on this, is that a lot of engineering knowledge is gained by trial and error, with hands-on, with failure, and then like thinking, deep thinking. And so it's easy to dumb down a class and like Eric said with like, option number one, just, it's only going to happen for a short time, okay, fine. But if anybody has any suggestions on good ways to give projects or things like that that are really deep thinking engineering where they can do it, I don't know, in their kitchen or something, would be great. And also really good whiteboarding things. Not all of us have tablets or whatever, but I mean, I do. I have a yoga, so most people can get access to, if not right away, some kind of good tablet or with a pen. And are there any good platforms that people have experienced that work great for whiteboarding, equations, and again, hands-on? Not to completely reiterate everything, but that's what I'm looking for.
Sorry, for me it's WebEx, but I don't know if is anybody familiar with WebEx? Yeah, I like that one. Maybe because I'm familiar, maybe because it was a Cisco thing and we all were trained with it. And sometimes, of course, we cannot do it now, but because you can see it one-on-one sometimes, but of course we cannot do it now because you need the big screens, right? But there are ways to do it. Let's put it that way. Yeah.
Yeah, I think Blackboard Collaborate also has similar type of features where you can actually write and annotate whatever you're putting up on the slide, so it could give you the whiteboard function. The other thing I would suggest is there's a lot of great material that's already been developed for engineering, and I know in chemical engineering, because that's kind of the discipline I came through before I went into engineering education. But there's the whole Learn Chemie series. They have a whole group up in Oregon State that has like virtual experiments that are all online where the students can play around with, like, if I change this parameter, then what happens to the experiment? So there's a lot of tools that have been developed that are out there digitally that we're just not broadly aware of. So I think this is a great time for the idea of like community storming, right? And bringing these resources that different people are aware of together. And I know that some of the universities have tried to start collating that and putting that type of stuff out there so that faculty can go, well, if I'm in this discipline, here's like a list of different resources that could help or support me. So we're not recreating all the content. We don't want to recreate the wheel when there's really great stuff out there. Leverage materials that have already been developed and then just build upon that in order to help your students.
One of the things that I thought was so cool, my sister's a second grade teacher, and I'm at her house right now, actually, because that's where I got stuck when this all manifested. So I've just been staying put. And she was on a call earlier today, and it was an informal group of second grade teachers and third, I guess probably all, K through 5 teachers. But they were just walking through and like, oh, I found this tool and it does this, and I found that tool and it does that. And everybody's sort of just sharing and crowdsourcing all of these different tools, and it's really kind of neat. And so, when we had gotten, really special kind of virtually connected communities like Keen, it's a neat way to continue to share. I'm looking at the feed that's going in chat right now, and Claudia, I think we should come back to your question in a moment, but like everybody's like, I didn't know Zoom had a whiteboard feature, and I feel like I've spent 10 hours on Zoom in the last 2 days, but I didn't know that existed. I haven't really looked at it. I saw that there were breakout rooms, and I couldn't figure out how I could experiment with that or test it by myself. So I was like, well, I'm going to go on YouTube, and I'm just going to look it up, and I'm going to start watching videos to see how does this work and what's going on with it. And so I do think there's a lot of neat content and tools out there. I wish Doan had to go and teach. I wish he was still on here because he can just run through a list. But if you email him, I'm sure he'll send it to you. But run through a list of all these kind of cool online collaboration tools. Claudia,
Yeah, Zoom. I was just going to say Zoom Pro. Just make sure that you're using Zoom Pro because it'll give you those breakout room features. And because not everything's available on regular Zoom, so just so that people aren't getting frustrated going, how come I don't see it? So if your university likely has Zoom Pro, then utilize that. And then also, depending on the platform, I've heard some schools saying, if you click on the Zoom that's within your learning platform, whatever it is, like Canvas, for instance, is what a lot of people use, sometimes that doesn't have all the features. So, go directly to zoom.usa, using your university thing. So anyways, just a little bit of heads up on things that can not work so well and which platform you want to be on. Make sure you're on Pro.
Yeah, I didn't even think about that, Verna, because I log in. I have two different accounts, right? I have my university Zoom account, my personal one, and that would have not been great if I sent the invite out through one and I didn't have the feature I was planning to use on the other. Claudia's question was around how are we sort of quality controlling ourselves and our pedagogy? It's one thing to say we're going to be bold, we're going to experiment, we're going to try new things, we're going to be okay with failing. It's another to make that bet, knowing that maybe the outcome might not be great for this current cohort of students, and how do we make sure that we're effective? I think that we're in uncharted territories. I think that no matter what, we always, to innovate, we have to try and fail and learn and work through that process. So I think at least for me, I'm having a very candid conversation with my class when we come back together next week around this is how we're going to move forward. This is what we're going to do. This is what we're going to try. And I've never done it before. And I don't know that it's going to be effective, but here's why I want to give it a shot. And I think it's worth it. The alternative is I record a lecture, I voice over a PowerPoint, I post it, and you watch it. And I think that they're going to be willing to take that bet with us, that trying and experimenting and exploring some of these tools is worthwhile. I know that when we talk about what Doan was saying with math, A builds on B, builds on C, builds on D, I can only presume that there's a lot of aspects of engineering that work very much the same way. And so if students don't learn something in your class that they might very well need critically in the next class, then that becomes a sort of a ripple effect. And I think, we just have to triage these things as best we can. You know what content in your class is most essential, and maybe you're most conservative with that. You know what content you have the most flex on, and maybe you're most experiment-oriented or, willing to try new things with that. You know what classes you're teaching that are really foundation and critical. You know what classes you're teaching that are maybe upper division electives, and maybe one of the best outcomes that could happen from that class, given our current context, is our students learn how to work together in a virtual environment, and they learn how to communicate and collaborate in a virtual environment. And there's probably a lot of value to that. And so I think that this is a skill building opportunity for all of us in terms of communication and collaboration online. One thing that I sent to my students the other day, if you Google it, it's the conference call in real life or video conference call in real life. And it shows how these things play out really awfully. And I basically sent them that video and I said, I want you to watch this. I didn't tell them what it was. And I said, this is not what I want. And so I'm trying to get them to think through what's their background like. If we're going to be synchronous in some ways and asynchronous in others, when we are synchronous, are you paying attention to mute? Are you, to the best you can, getting to a more quiet place? Are you contributing or are you distracting from the environment? I think that we're going to learn what works and what doesn't work through this process. Claudia, I empathize great. I think that your question alone just shows that you're a really engaged educator and you care a lot about the outcomes. I don't not care about those outcomes. I think that we're making lemonade out of lemons right now. And so we've got to all balance and juggle to the best extent we can.
I think Claudia is absolutely right. Is that going back to an earlier question, which was about risk? I think part of the risk is that students just saying, this isn't worth it, I'm dropping out. Okay, so then our schools don't have as many students. Now on the flip side, I know a lot of students. It's like, well, shoot, it's like there's not easy to get a job now. I think I better stay in school, but we need to try to maintain the highest level of education, and in terms of trying new things, I think absolutely try some of the new things. All you have to do is do polls and do surveys with your students. I think all learning platforms have those. Fortunately, a year ago when I started teaching, there was a good collaborative event with good practices, and it was, after the first 3 weeks, survey your students. It usually only has to be 3 to 5 questions, and I could even send the questions that was the best practice because it was great. I got to understand, like, am I, what do they like, what do they don't like, and it also helps to save you, because if you ask the question, are there any issues, you can also follow it up with, have you brought it forward to the teacher or to myself as an instructor, because they need to have that door know that it's wide open to them, and it's a partnership between the students and the teacher in this situation. It always is, but even more so now. So I'd be happy to dig them up and send the questions out, but it really helps you as a teacher and also gives the students the message that they need to partner with you in the education experience. But surveys and polls, and Zoom has polls that you can set up in advance, but then the survey, if you do it in, say, Canvas or whatever your platform is, under quizzes or whatever your platform has it, then you can do, maybe more than just one, maybe a couple times over the quarter, try new things and then get feedback on it.
It's definitely an interesting time we're in. I want to be mindful of everybody's time. I think we have about 10 minutes left on the block that we were working through. This open dialogue has been really, really interesting to me. I'm kind of curious to know, like, what is the one thing you all are working on or most excited about trying or doing in your classroom right now? Because as I've engaged in some of these conversations just in a virtual, albeit virtual, one-on-one way, I've learned so much just from ideas of other people and how I could spin it. And so almost like a sharing opportunity. What's the one thing you're trying that's maybe new or different that you think is going to be really cool? Because I might want to steal it.
I think one thing actually that my kids inspired me to do, so Mike, building off of your comment about having homeschoolers at home behind you, my daughter especially, she's in grade 8 now, so she's very technologically savvy, more so than I think I am. But she's been really good about creating videos and stuff, and I think showcasing to the students that we're people and we're going through this situation and how we're adjusting to the transition could be helpful from like a mental health perspective from our students, because it kind of shows how, we're not just like automatically switching over and we've got this all figured out and then this is how your classes need to go online and it's going to be this and this and this till the end of the semester. But it shows that we live in the world of uncertainty too, and we're developing and changing. And I think if they have role models to see that it's hard, even when you have it, even when you're in a career and you have things more together as they might consider, that then provides them a roadmap that they can follow, and also builds on, like what Verna was saying, that connection between the instructor and the student, because I think oftentimes they feel very separated from us and like, oh, you're at this stage and you have all this expertise and I can't come to you with issues or problems that I have. So I think that's a new way that you can build connections that my kids inspired me to do.
I have one thing that I'm going to try that I just learned about is there's a feature. So to kind of go to Mike Rust's kind of challenge, and that all of us will probably face from time to time. An easy thing is I'm going to try is the green screen, because actually there's a feature on Zoom that is, if you have a pretty decent camera, so fairly new, you can use a green screen, put a nice backdrop of nature or something, because then if you have a dog coming in or kids coming in back and behind you, that's not going to show up. So it gives you like a cleaner kind of screen. So I'm going to try that just for fun too. And the other thing I wanted to offer out that I think that there's an opportunity for is, I probably wouldn't have necessarily just sort of jumped onto this meeting, except for of the situation that we're in. And so I've started like sharing more stuff and, ideas. So I think that's an opportunity for all of us. So the one thing I wanted to let people know about, because ethics in engineering and technology is something that a lot of people are getting more on board with and wanting to teach. So at Santa Clara University, I was just made aware of it just a couple of months ago, but how world-renowned our institution is. We have what's called the Markula Center, and online there are completely formatted case studies on technology and ethics situations that are like plug and play for you to be able to teach your students. So if anyone is interested in that, I'm happy to like send the link. Maybe I'll try and get it right now onto the into the chat. But I've had a couple of colleagues outside of Santa Clara, even within Santa Clara, that weren't even aware of it. But our Markula Center has just a huge amount of extremely valuable information for people that are interested in that. And it's got a extremely well thought out process of how you think about an ethical situation. So you're not just kind of going by your own personal opinion, but how to structure the thought process. So I think it's really, for me, it was very enlightening.
Vern, it's really interesting. I've been playing with that green screen thing. So it's on the newer computers and newer webcams, you don't even need to have a physical green screen. It just detects you and replaces your background on Zoom. So
exactly.
It's at the bottom to the right of the little video icon. There's this little up arrow, and then you can change the background image. I'm going to share my screen real quick if this lets me. Can you see that? The Rowan.
Yes, exactly.
So I just literally went to Google Images and I searched Rowan University, and I've been using this background. And we made another one for like during actual synchronous learning that's got some like little messaging and stuff in the top corner. But you literally can pull up any. I don't know how to get back to my computer now. You can literally pull up any image you want and make it your background. And so it's, I'm going to have some fun with different ones just to be engaging with my class and different images of campus and things. And it's one of the coolest features that I never knew existed until I had to deep dive into Zoom the last few days. Other thoughts or tools or things we're excited about that anybody wants to share? Well, I think this has been a kind of a cool dialogue. I very much enjoyed talking with everyone here. Cheryl, do you have any kind of closing thoughts on where we're at?
I think one of the things that might be useful, and I was just about to type this into the chat for Keen, is the idea maybe we can set a discussion thread where we can kind of capture these resources and ideas for the community, and that way you can kind of like hop in. Maybe we have the discussion thread sorted based on the type of class you're teaching to, so that some might be more applicable to certain content areas than others. But that could be a good crowdsourcing way that we can take all the great information that many of you guys shared today in this session and also collate the greater community, because I know not everyone could actually make it here for this call.
So I think that's a fantastic idea. And I was going to end by saying I edited a journal called Entrepreneurship, Education, and Pedagogy. And it's a teaching journal. We publish teaching cases, we publish research articles around pedagogy, and we publish learning innovations, which are anything from an experiential exercise to any other sort of innovation that you're doing that's just sharing a best practice. And so we're very open to anything that relates to a lot of topics that overlap between our disciplines. So Cheryl's published in the journal before, actually, on some engineering, entrepreneurship education or engineering education type content that was related. So if you're going through the process of converting classes and you're doing something that's cool and it might be a fit for for a broader audience, write it up, submit it to the journal, submit it through the Engineering Unleashed platform, share it through the discussion thread, consider putting together a card. Did I get that right? One of the cards. Like I think the more that we can build and share these kind of tools, the better off we're all going to be. It's always interesting to me every time I log into Engineering Unleashed to see some of the different content that people's put out there. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think as my wrap-up comment, I would just like to say, I think I really appreciate the community that we have in Keene, all the people and their willingness to share and come together. And my wishes are that all of us can see this as an opportunity to kind of build on each other's strengths and then raise things up so that our students can succeed and do well in the coming months.
Likewise. Well, thank you all. Jordan, I think we can end the recording and